I'm not what you'd call a success story. I grew up in a family with high expectations, good grades, a good job, the whole perfect life thing. But I was never that person. I just couldn't live up to what they wanted me to be. It felt like I was suffocating, always under their pressure. By the time I turned 22, I was burnt out. Completely, utterly burnt out. I felt like I was suffocating. That's when I made the decision. So, I did what anyone would do. I left. I couldn't take the constant nagging anymore, the expectations. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I drove until I ran out of gas, and found myself in a small town that looked like it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. It wasn't much, but it was far away from the pressure, the expectations, and the constant feeling of failure. I rented a tiny apartment above a laundromat, and for a while, I thought I'd finally found peace. But peace doesn't pay the bills. After a few months of living off my savings, reality started to creep in. I needed money, and fast. I tried a few odd jobs, dishwashing, cleaning, even some construction work, but nothing stuck. Then one day I saw the ad. It was taped to a telephone pole, half hidden under layers of other notices. The words "night shift clerk wanted" caught my eye. I pulled the paper down and read the rest. Gas station on Route 47. No experience needed. Apply in person. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. I called the number at the bottom of the ad and spoke to a man named Mr. Davis. He sounded old, tired, and not particularly interested in my background. After a brief conversation, he told me to come by the station the next day for an interview. When I arrived, the place looked exactly how you'd picture an old gas station on a deserted highway. The paint was peeling, the sign was flickering, and the lot was littered with trash. Mr. Davis was waiting inside. He was a wiry old man with a permanent scowl and a cigarette dangling from his lips. The interview was quick and informal. He asked if I had any experience working nights, if I was comfortable being alone, and if I could handle restocking shelves. That was it. Before I knew it, I was hired. Just as I was about to leave, he handed me a piece of paper. It looked like a set of company policies, but when I glanced at it, I realized it was something else entirely. A list of rules. He must have noticed the confused look on my face because he said, "Don't take these lightly. Follow them to the letter, and you'll be fine. Break one, and, well, just don't break them." Here's what the list said. 1. Always keep the pump lights on after dark. 2. Never leave the station unattended between 12 o'clock and 6 a.m. 3. Do not look directly at customers arriving after midnight. 4. If the phone rings but there's no one on the line, hang up immediately. 5. Never check the security footage between 3 o'clock and 3:15 a.m. 6. Lock the storage room door at all times, no exceptions. 7. Ignore any knocking on the glass after 2 a.m. 8. If you see someone standing by pump 4 without a car, do not interact. 9. Always restock the coffee station before 1 a.m., never later. 10. Never open the register if a customer's face is obscured. At first, I thought it was a joke, some kind of initiation ritual for new employees. But the way Mr. Davis looked at me, dead serious, almost scared, made me think twice. I nodded, stuffed the paper into my pocket, and left. I told myself I'd read it over later, but honestly, I didn't give it much thought. Rules are rules, right? How hard could it be to follow them? The first night on the job felt like stepping into a time warp. The gas station looked even worse under the harsh fluorescent lights. The walls were lined with faded advertisements. The shelves were stocked with the kind of junk food that probably hadn't been touched in years, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and cleaning supplies. Mr. Davis was waiting for me behind the counter. He gave me a quick rundown of my duties, mostly restocking shelves, cleaning up spills, and manning the register. Then he handed me the keys and left without another word. As soon as he was gone, the silence hit me. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were the only person left in the world. No cars, no voices, just the faint hum of the refrigerators in the back. I tried to keep myself busy. I swept the floor, wiped down the counters, and organized the candy display. By midnight, I'd run out of things to do. That's when I remembered the list of rules. I pulled the paper out of my pocket and read it over again. It still seemed ridiculous. I mean, come on, don't look directly at customers after midnight. What was that supposed to mean? But as the night wore on, I started to notice little things. At around 1 a.m., I was restocking the chips aisle when I heard a car pull into the lot. The sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed through the empty station. I looked up and saw an old sedan parked near Pump 3. The driver didn't get out. They just sat there, engine idling, headlights off. At first, I thought maybe they were deciding what to buy or waiting for someone. But after 10 minutes, they were still there, just sitting. I started to feel uneasy. The longer they sat there, the more it felt like they were watching me, even though I couldn't see them through the tinted windows. I remembered the rule: do not look directly at customers arriving after midnight. I forced myself to turn away and focus on my work, even though every instinct told me to keep an eye on the car. Eventually, the sound of the engine faded, and when I looked up again, the car was gone. That was the first time I felt like maybe there was something to these rules. The rest of the night was quiet. Too quiet. By my second night, the rules were burned into my brain. I didn't believe in them, not yet, but there was something about that first night that stuck with me. The car that just sat there, the way the engine noise vanished without me even hearing it leave. I started to think maybe the rules weren't just a joke or some weird hazing ritual. Maybe they were there for a reason. When I came in for my shift, Mr. Davis didn't stick around long. He handed me the keys, gave me his usual gruff nod, and muttered, "You'll be fine if you stick to the rules." Then he left, like he couldn't wait to be anywhere but here. The night started off the same as before. A few customers came and went, truckers grabbing coffee, locals topping off their tanks. Nothing unusual. But around midnight, the air seemed to change. It was subtle at first, like the hum of the refrigerators got quieter, or the lights flickered just a little longer than usual. I tried to shake it off, but then I noticed something strange. I was wiping down the counter when I saw a man walking up to the door. He looked normal enough at first, middle-aged, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. But as he got closer, I realized something was off. His face was too smooth, like it had been blurred out in a photograph. No eyes, no nose, just a vague shape where his features should have been. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, staring at him through the glass. Then I remembered the rule: never open the register if a customer's face is obscured. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring. Or at least I think he was staring. It was hard to tell without eyes. Finally, he turned and walked away. No car, no footsteps. Just gone. I locked the door after that, even though the rules didn't say to. I didn't care. I wasn't taking any chances. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I half expected to see that faceless man standing there waiting. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted. Mr. Davis was waiting for me in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. "How'd it go?" he asked. I wanted to tell him about the man with no face, but something in his expression stopped me. He looked like he already knew. "Fine," I lied. He nodded and got into his truck. As I watched him drive away, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly I'd signed up for. It wasn't until my fourth night that things really started to get weird. I came in at 10 p.m. like usual. Mr. Davis was waiting for me, but this time he seemed different. His usual gruff demeanor was replaced with something closer to nervousness. He handed me the keys and said, "Remember, stick to the rules." All of them. He didn't wait for me to respond. He just left. The first couple of hours were uneventful. I restocked the shelves, cleaned the bathrooms, and double-checked the coffee station to make sure it was stocked before 1 a.m. Then, around midnight, the phone rang. At first, I thought it was just a prank call. I picked up the receiver and said, "Hello?" No answer. I waited, thinking maybe the connection was bad. But there was nothing, just dead air. I was about to hang up when I remembered the rule. If the phone rings but there's no one on the line, hang up immediately. Something about the silence on the other end made my skin crawl. I slammed the receiver down and stepped away from the phone, my heart racing. That's when I heard it. 3 loud knocks on the glass behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. The parking lot was empty, the pump lights casting long shadows across the pavement. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or maybe an animal, but deep down I knew better. The knocks came again, louder this time. I grabbed the list of rules and reread it, my hands shaking. Ignore any knocking on the glass after 2 a.m. It wasn't even 2 o'clock yet. I stood there, frozen, as the knocks continued. 3, then 4, then 5. Finally, they stopped. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until the silence returned. I sat down behind the counter, clutching the list like it was some kind of talisman. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. Then the clock hit 3 a.m. The lights in the station flickered, and the air grew colder. I glanced at the security monitor, even though I knew I wasn't supposed to. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was someone standing by pump 4. They weren't moving, just standing there, staring at the building. I couldn't make out their features, but there was something wrong with the way they were standing, too still, like a mannequin or a statue. I grabbed the phone and called Mr. Davis. The line rang and rang, but he didn't pick up. When I looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. I didn't sleep that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing by pump 4 waiting. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking everything, that this job wasn't as creepy as it felt. Maybe I was just sleep-deprived or letting the isolation get to me. But by my 5th night, I couldn't keep lying to myself. The night started quietly enough. A few customers came in before midnight, an old man buying a pack of smokes, a trucker refilling his coffee. By 12:30 a.m., I was alone again. That's when things started to happen. It began with the sound of the pumps. One of them beeped, signaling that someone had started refueling. I looked outside but didn't see a car. Just the empty lot, the pump's nozzle swinging gently, as if someone had just let it go. I stepped outside, the cold air biting against my skin. The pump was still beeping, so I shut it off manually and headed back inside. As soon as I walked in, the phone rang. I froze, staring at it for a long moment. My hand hovered over the receiver, the list of rules flashing in my mind. If the phone rings but there's no one on the line, hang up immediately. I picked it up anyway. "Hello," I said, my voice shaky. At first, there was nothing, just static, like a distant thunderstorm. Then I heard it, a faint voice, barely audible. "Help me." I slammed the receiver down, my heart pounding. I tried to calm myself, pacing behind the counter. Maybe it was a prank, I told myself. Someone trying to mess with the new guy. That's when I heard it, tapping. 3 sharp knocks on the glass behind me. I turned around, but the lot was empty. The pumps, the parking spaces, everything was exactly as it should be. I stood there, staring out into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. And then I saw it. A figure was standing by pump 4. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was tall, his clothes ragged and torn, his face obscured by shadows. I grabbed the list of rules again, my hands trembling. If you see someone standing by pump 4 without a car, do not interact. I wanted to run, to lock myself in the storage room and wait for morning. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the figure. Finally, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I didn't sleep that day or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man standing by the pump, waiting. By my 6th night, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours in days, and the stress was starting to take its toll. But I couldn't quit. I needed the money, and honestly, I wasn't sure if the gas station would let me leave. The night started off quiet, like usual, but around 1 a.m., the temperature dropped suddenly. The air inside the station felt heavy, like a storm was about to hit. I walked over to the coffee station to restock it. Another one of the rules. Always restock the coffee station before 1 a.m., never later. As I was pouring the coffee into the dispenser, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see a customer. But the store was empty. The footsteps continued, circling the counter. I grabbed the phone, my fingers fumbling over the buttons as I tried to call Mr. Davis. The line rang and rang, but he didn't answer. That's when I noticed the security monitor. The screen was flickering, the image distorted. But in the static, I could make out shapes, figures moving around the lot. They were tall and thin, their limbs bending at unnatural angles. I turned away from the screen, my stomach twisting in knots. I didn't want to see anymore. The rest of the night was a blur. The lights flickered constantly, the sound of footsteps never stopping. When 3 a.m. rolled around, I broke another rule. I looked at the footage. At first, I couldn't make out what I was seeing. The lot was empty, the pumps still and silent. But then, slowly, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. They were human-like, but wrong. Their movements were jerky, like marionettes on tangled strings. Their faces were blurred, their features smudged like a charcoal sketch left in the rain. I couldn't look away. One of them turned toward the camera, its head tilting unnaturally to one side. It raised a hand and pointed directly at me. The screen went black. I dropped the list of rules, my hands shaking. I shouldn't have looked. The seventh night started the same as all the others, but deep down, I knew something was different. There was a heaviness in the air that felt impossible to ignore, like the station itself was holding its breath. I told myself I could get through it if I just stuck to the rules. I repeated them in my head like a mantra. Keep the pump lights on, don't look at customers after midnight, hang up the phone if no one's there, don't check the footage at 3 a.m., and on and on. I'd broken 2 rules already. I looked at the footage at 3 a.m., and I answered the phone when no one was there. And yet, I was still here. I convinced myself I was lucky, that I had dodged whatever punishment the station had in store. But luck runs out. The first few hours were uneventful. A couple of customers stopped in before midnight, their transactions so normal that they felt almost surreal in the midst of everything else. Midnight came and went, and I stayed behind the counter, staring at the pumps and the parking lot, waiting. At 2:45 a.m., the phone rang. I stared at it, the shrill sound echoing in the empty station. My pulse quickened as I remembered the rule. If the phone rings but there's no one on the line, hang up immediately. I reached for the receiver, my hand hovering over it. Every instinct screamed at me to follow the rule, to hang up and move on. But curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't stop thinking about the voice I'd heard before, the faint plea for help. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. "Hello?" I repeated, my voice shaking. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I had to press the receiver tight against my ear to hear. "Let me out." The voice was desperate, trembling with fear. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. There was no answer, just the faint sound of breathing. "Let me out," the voice said again, louder this time. The line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I paced behind the counter, running my hands through my hair. What the hell was going on? Who, or what, was calling me? Then the tapping started. 3 sharp knocks, right behind me. I spun around, but the store was empty. The glass door to the lot was closed, the pumps still glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. I told myself to stay calm, to focus on the rules. But when I turned back to the counter, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The clock on the wall read 3 a.m. I glanced at the security monitor. I shouldn't have. At first, the screen showed only static. But slowly, shapes began to emerge. Figures moved in the darkness, their limbs long and spindly, their faces shrouded in shadow. One of them stood by pump 4. It was the same figure I'd seen before, tall and motionless, its face obscured. I couldn't look away. The door to the station swung open with a loud creak. A man walked in. His clothes were tattered and filthy, his face hidden beneath the brim of a hat. He didn't speak, didn't look at me. He just walked up to the counter and stood there waiting. I reached for the phone, but it didn't work. The line was dead. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly to one side. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. I remembered the rule. Never open the register if a customer's face is obscured. But he didn't ask for anything. He just stood there unmoving. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, his face was illuminated. It wasn't a face. It was a blank, featureless void like a mannequin's head. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The man, or whatever he was, tilted his head further, as if studying me. The lights flickered again, and he was gone. I thought I was safe. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The security monitor flickered back to life, and I saw myself on the screen, standing behind the counter. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, the figure from Pump 4 was standing just a few feet away. I turned around, but there was no one there. The monitor flickered again. This time, I saw myself outside the station, standing by Pump 4. I wasn't moving. I was just standing there, staring straight ahead. The screen went black, and then the whispers started. They came from all around me, faint and indistinct, like voices carried on the wind. "You broke the rules," they said. "You didn't listen." I tried to run, but the door wouldn't open. The lights flickered wildly, and the air grew heavy, suffocating. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "You're part of it now," they said. "You can't leave." The last thing I remember is the clock on the wall. It was stuck at 3:15 a.m. If you ever find yourself at a gas station late at night, and you see someone standing by Pump 4, don't approach them. Don't even look at them. And for God's sake, never, ever break the rules. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more chilling tales.